I'd like to thank to Lahore Literature Festival. I am so amazed by the audience and the organization of everything, and how is it literature so important to this city, this so fantastic city, and this ancient city with so many stories to tell. So this is about how come cities are also a character in literature. How come cities can influence our imagination and the way, even the way that we live, and even the way that we feel. But I will start to present our honorable guests. So let me introduce you Mr. David Wagner. He's a German writer born he studied comparative literature and art history at Bonn, in Paris, and Berlin, and he has lived in cities like Rome, Barcelona, Mexico City. He probably will live here in Lahore after this, I hope. So his literally debut was in 2000, right? With the novel, I don't say how to say in German, Mine, something like that?
Meine nachtblaue Hose, which literally translates into my night blue pair of trousers or night blue pants.
Okay. So
I'm still wearing them.
I think you have a lot to talk about it today. And you have a very prestigious prizes like the Leipzig Book Fair Prize. And we hope to listen to you and to have more thoughts about Berlin and other cities, of course. So afterwards, I can, you know, this important writer of yours, Hamid. Did I say it well? Thank you so much for being so kind with my bad English. So this Pakistani novelist is one of the kind because he has been on the short list of Booker Man Prize for 2 times, so congratulations, that's a huge, huge event. And we will talk about, I don't know, New York, London, Lahore, what do you think? Athens also. So you see, cities are very important to the writers. So if you are talking about Athens, Sofka Zinovieff, is that the way you said? Thank you so much for being with us.
Perfect.
So, thank you. Sofka is a British author and a journalist. Born in London, she studied social anthropology at Cambridge University and went to Greece and fell in love, right? With the city and everything.
Right.
That's a good way to introduce you, the passion about literature and books in some way also, okay? So thank you so much for being here. And Mohsin, I present Mohsin, Osama Siddique? Siddique, sorry. He's a great teacher, a great lawyer, and a great writer also. And he loves to write about this wonderful city, Lahore, and I'm kind of curious because he knows Portuguese authors like José Saramago, is a Nobel Prize, and Fernando Pessoa is a brilliant poet of Portugal also, so you have to write about Lisbon one of these days. Thank you. And just to make a little presentation, a legal scholar, university teacher, he used to study at Oxford and in Harvard Law School, lived in New York and several other cities, and welcome everybody to be here with us. Thank you so much. Let's start with one, I think, conceptual question. What about the function of, let's start with the lady. What is the main function of the architecture of a place, of a city, in your fiction, in your action of imagination?
That's a very interesting question in relation to Athens in particular, because Athens, when it became a modern capital 200 years ago, there were 3 goats and a few old shacks there. It was a very unimportant town. It was taken over and a classical idea of a city was born. That was knocked down in the 20th century and a modern concrete city thrown up because of the needs of the modern population. And so I think that looking at all the different layers from the ancient history that you see through to the modern, which many visitors to Athens find it difficult, you can absolutely tell the character. And sometimes the city there feels like a woman who may not be the most beautiful woman, but she has many, or man, come to that, but the person has these charms which the more you speak with them and the more you go down the small alleyway and find the surprise at the end, which in Athens it will normally be something contradictory, either very old or very new, or you smell the night jasmine and start swooning, and then there's an open drain that's got blocked nearby. So I think it's full of contradictions, Athens.
So that's a very good way to start to write, right? Can I ask you, what do you think about the contradictions between the walls and the streets of your city or your cities? Can it also help your imagination? Sorry, I was looking. I think your microphone is, thank you.
Hello. So the traditional architecture in Lahore, like many places, looks inward. There's a courtyard and you look in at the courtyard and your back is to the street. And you see that in the old city, you see it even in the countryside where people have a courtyard at the center of a village home. And this looking inwards is very much like writing. I think, what writers do is we sort of make this courtyard. And in that courtyard, we have this fictional, alive place. And so for me, I suppose Lahore feels very much like that. Even Athens feels a bit to me like that, interestingly enough. That when I went to Athens the first time in 1993, and I've been going every few years, I suppose, since, the cities have much in common. One is that they have this magnificent past that they would like to say is directly connected to their present, but they sometimes stumble on how they got from there to here. They have, beautiful bits and much less beautiful bits. And yet, there's something very special about the feeling they're living cities. And as far as Lahore is concerned, I think Lahore is sprawling, it's spreading, it's extending outwards. It's now starting to go vertical, it's going higher. And my own vantage point on it is I've sort of lived in the same house in Lahore my whole life. So I haven't moved, but the city's been moving around me. And the neighbors have moved out, and a 20-story building has come in. And so I suppose as a fiction writer, the city feels very much like a novel that's sort of unfolding. But I would also, I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say about it. I imagine that in its own way, every city feels like this. In Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities, we are led to one city after another, each of which is a bit like the Venice of our narrator. So I think that what I'm saying about Lahore and to a certain extent about Athens, maybe everybody says it or feels it in a way about their own city.
Thank you so much. David, I would like to ask you, can a city change a story? You have a story in your mind, you have a character, 2 characters, but that city can change. Berlin, Mexico City can change the whole story for you?
Well, let me start first thanking the Literary Festival and thanking the Annemarie Schimmel House for bringing me to the wonderful city of Lahore. It's the first time for me here in Lahore and first time in Pakistan, and I'm very grateful to get to know, to get to explore a new city for me. Yeah. And I have to say, I've been here only 2 days, and it's an amazing city. And I already fell in love with it, I have to admit. And I've been to the walled city, the old town, and but I want to go back. That's an amazing experience. It feels like a living entity. Yeah. And I would like to say that cities, for me, well, they feel like living beings. They are persons to me, yeah? And so you use the pronoun she for a city, yeah? I love that. We don't do that in German, but I like it very much when you can do it in English and other languages.
So for you, it's a he or a she?
No,
I started with a she, and in Greek,
yeah.
Athens is feminine.
But you say it in French as well, Paris la belle, and so. But in German we don't really use a gender for a city, and that's kind of sad. I feel sometimes. And to admit, so I was invited to talk about Berlin. Yeah, that's the city I live in since 1991, and I came there to study. And before, so I grew up on the Rhine in Bonn, and near Bonn, in medieval cities, Roman cities. Yeah. So growing up, I had the concept of growing up in a Roman city with a center. They have the church, and you have rest of Roman temples. And when I was 20 years old, I moved to Berlin, and as you might know, Berlin never was a Roman city. Berlin, in fact, is a very young city. Yeah, it feels younger than New York City in a way. Yeah, it is younger than New York City in a way, because it mostly grew, and it grew very fast after the Franco-Prussian War, after 1871. Exploded, and it was some kind of the Shanghai of its times. And then, as you might know, the city of Berlin had this very special destiny of being. We had our partition, yeah. Berlin was divided and it was a walled city, and then when I moved there, it was an open city again, and it was a very fascinating time because you had all this open space, and you had the ruins of East Berlin, and so I roamed and I walked the city for the last 30 years and explored these changements and wrote a book about it, like with a lot of walks and explorings, and yeah, and that's what I do mostly. But to be very honest, Berlin is not my only love. Yeah, so recently, or the last years, I was mostly in Istanbul, and my latest novel, Werkin, is in fact a novel about the city of Istanbul. Yeah.
Thank you. So we were talking about before, Mr. Siddique, this audience, but we were talking about how come a language can change your literature. So a city can change also your story and your literature.
So it's fascinating to listen to other writers and their relationship with cities. And I think there are commonalities in terms of how we all approach cities. But just to add to that, I think much as we look for universals, and there are plenty of universals. So one way to look at Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities is that ultimately every city can look similar. Or you can also look at it this way, that whichever city he looked at, the one which came to his mind and which was most vibrant in his imagination was always Venice, because that's the city he loved. So I think my relationship with Lahore is also similar. Lahore is a modern city. Lahore is also a medieval and a pre-medieval city. And you can see the architecture and even certain cultural facets from all these ages sort of concurrently existing alongside each other. But then you also notice that Lahore has some particular things which you will not find anywhere else, which I'm sure is true for Berlin and Istanbul and for Athens, which is what makes it distinctive. Because it's not just we who form the cities also form us. So there's some underlying sort of almost spirit-like thing to cities, which is the character of a city, right? Having said that, the bigger the city, the older the city, the more complex it is, right? So just to give you one example, Lahore is famous for its Sufi saints, these mystical figures who stand not just for the propagation of a particular religion, but also for a larger message of love. And that's why the devotion continues centuries after their demise. But if you go to the tombs of these Sufi saints within Lahore, they have very distinct flavor or mood. So if you go to the Data Sahib, who's the patron saint of Lahore, it's very different from Madhu Lal Hussain. That's very different from Mia Mir. And so within the spiritual realm and the kind of popular devotion shown at these places, the mood changes. And I love that. I love to explore the fact that there are so many different ways to explore spirituality within the same city, within a particular tradition. Remember also, this was a major Hindu city before partition, and that is very much evident in the architecture, and the further you go back. So language, you asked me, and I write both in Urdu and English, and it's very interesting that I started writing my second novel in English, and somehow it just struck me that the kind of characters from old Lahore, the walled city, I wanted to capture, and this may be my own ineptness, somebody else could do a better job. When I was writing about them in English, they sort of seemed caricaturish. And it seemed to me that humor was very important in those characters. And humor, I feel, is something which is the most natural in your mother tongue, as is romance. And Urdu is also a very romantic language. So the passages I was writing, which were full of nostalgia and humor, when I switched to Urdu, I felt it was a lot more organic. And so there, I think the city and the flavor of the city and the theme I'd chosen itself determined the language I wanted to write in. But there are facets of Lahore where I think I would be much more comfortable writing in English because it just has the lexicon, the vocabulary for it. So it's a very interesting symbiotic relationship between writers and cities and how they influence each other.
Thank you so much. So, Sofka, when you write about Athens or another city, do you feel these different layers of emotion? You were talking about the feelings, about the smells and everything, and the heat. Can we feel another story coming when you feel the sun or when you feel the rain? So there's a lot of layers when you feel a city also, but in terms of emotional also, right?
Yes, and I think if we're talking about the city as a character, the mic a bit closer. One of the things arriving in Lahore only 2 days ago, not even, that I have felt some similarities, as Mohsin was saying, between Athens and Lahore. I mean, I know I'm not qualified to say anything about Lahore, but I had a wonderful Russian great uncle, Kirill, who died some years ago, aged 104, who in his childhood saw Rasputin, so he knew a lot of things. And he said you can write a book about a city or a place when you've been there either for 5 days or for 5 years. And so I think I'm in the sort of not even 5 days, but because everything is fresh and new, you see it all with these open eyes. And so I think comparing Athens and Lahore, what I sense is if they were people, you would say this is somebody who has been through a lot of trauma in their life. Athens, well, Greece and Pakistan, obviously, they had colonial occupiers, they had big influxes and changes of population exchanges, Greece with Turkey in 1922. And obviously we know here India and Pakistan being separated. The British obviously here, the Ottoman Turks in Greece. So there are these traumas, if you were thinking in lying on the psychiatrist's or the psychoanalyst's chaise long if you were a person. But also both places seem to me to have this very strong, passionate, loving, family-oriented, rather romantic resilience. And so both places have been able to get through terrible traumas, rather like a person who is made stronger or better, because some people are like that. Some people become destroyed by their traumas, but others live through it. And so I sense these two similarities. But just to finish off by saying, when you asked about the senses in a place, I made a podcast about Athens a few years ago called Athens Unpacked, like a documentary podcast. And in one episode, I tried to imagine if I was going to make a bespoke perfume about the city. You know, you can go to make your own perfume in certain places in Paris, and you say, I'd like a little smell of jasmine with the leather of my mother's handbag, and to make something to suit you. And in Athens, it became very clear what the provocations would be, starting off with the bitter orange blossom that's everywhere in the streets in the spring, some basil that's planted outside every taverna or on every balcony. You'd go down and you'd get the frankincense burning in the little Byzantine chapels, coffee outside every coffee house, and then every great perfume in the great perfume houses tells a story. It always has to have not only the beautiful flowers, but something dirty, even a bit disgusting, like ambergris, which is from the whale's intestines. That often goes into a great perfume. So I think for Athens, and probably for Lahore, and maybe many places, you'd have something, you know, the smell of some exhaust fume from the terrible traffic, which Athens shares with Lahore, or maybe cigarette smoke. So I think one could think for every city of making its own bespoke perfume.
So, thank you. So, Mohsin, is that the way I should? Okay. So I'm interesting about the trauma of the cities. Do you think literature can be the therapy for so many traumas, of course, in history, but in a specific trauma that it is so visible in the cities, do you think literature can help to explain and to resolve and to say to the other what happened and how to go forward?
So I think imagination is a response to trauma. So human beings are born and we know that we're going to die. And this is sort of the fundamental trauma of being a human being. And so we react to that in many ways, and one of the ways in which we react is by imagining. And through our imaginations, we have access to something that is infinite, that sort of transcends time, it transcends mortality. And in each of the other traumas that we experience that are kind of echoes of this basic human mortality trauma, we also, in a way, deal with through imagination. We imagine the past differently as it gets further away from us. We imagine the future. We imagine other lives we could have lived. We imagine things that could never be. And so we are able to make reality less of a kind of prison for ourselves. And that, in a sense, is what a life is that how do you make reality less of a prison for yourself is one of the central tasks of living a life. So when you think of the trauma of a city, and Lahore, like Athens, has experienced many traumas, Lahore is traumatic by location. If you are coming from Central Asia, as people traditionally headed this way would come, and you cross this great river, Ravi, then the first of the great cities of the northern subcontinental plain that you would come across is Lahore. And so Lahore has been plundered and invaded for centuries. It has always somehow managed to take its invaders and make them into locals to a certain extent, to, you know, accrete layer upon layer of invasion and then a kind of new syncretic thing. And expulsion, including partition, but not just partition. You know, Lahore, even now, if you go to the airport, you will see lots of young people, particularly young men, who are fleeing the city, sometimes very unwillingly, because the city didn't give them enough to build a life. And so, you know, Lahore is always, in a sense, being invaded and expelling people. And again, maybe all cities are doing this, but certainly this city does it. And one thing which fiction allows us to do is to live that experience very intensely. In my own case, having left Lahore at the age of 3, returned at 9, left again at 18, you know, come back. When I'm not in Lahore, writing a fiction about Lahore allowed me to, in a way, live in my imagination in this place. And when I'm in Lahore, writing a fiction somewhere far away, even if it's a time that has gone by, or a time that has yet to come, it allows me to also, in a way, leave and connect with this other thing. So yes, I think that writing and reading fiction is a response to trauma. I think that Lahore is a city that has enormous amounts of trauma. And I think that there's no accident that Lahore has produced some absolutely stupendous works of art on the huge scale of architecture, on the more modest scale of poetry and fiction, and also just in the lived scale of, you know, if you look out the window at the guy on the motorbike next to you, cruising down the canal road, you know, lost in his own little world, you see artists all around you. So I think that the trauma of Lahore has made it into a city which is incredibly vibrant in the arts.
So, David, speaking about time, you were talking about it earlier and how the city changed, all cities changing, and you wrote about it. So, what do you think about time, your time in your literature? Is it very different from the time that you've been looking and you've been experienced? Do you have 2 times when you write? Can I explain it better? You have your time as a person and a time as a writer?
Well,
The interesting thing is, when I came to Berlin in 1991, I always had the feeling I missed the real Berlin. I missed the walled West Berlin. Yeah, there's the myth of West Berlin, the walled city, and I was kind of sad that I missed out on that. But living there then in the 90s, now, 25, 30 years later, I realize, I was there in the mythic 90s. Yeah? So that taught me that, the past is always invented afterwards. Yeah? So, now when I speak to students or younger people and I say, oh, well, yeah, I saw all these clubs and the illegal bars and everything in Berlin. Like, oh yeah, you were here in the 90s. Oh wow, I missed that. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So Berlin in the last 30 years was kind of special because it missed out on so much of development after the war that the last 10, 20 years, it was a process of normalizing, in fact. This is kind of a sad story. A lot of people say now Berlin has lost its charm. There are no empty lots anymore, no bombed places, no ruins. Everything has become, we have the same malls than like you have in Lahore or any place else. So in my lifetime, which is not that long now, I've seen the city change. But that's the nature of cities, that they change, that they always change. And for Berlin, there is this famous saying, but it's from the early 20s. Berlin, the doomed city, always doomed to become and never to be. Yeah? So, and this, in a way, is true for all cities, I think. But I would, until now, we have talked very positively about cities in general here, and you talked about Venice, the invisible city. Venice, well, Venice is one of my favorite cities as well, and I spent a lot of time, and I really work best in Venice. And it took me a while to realize why. It's because there are no cars. Yeah, this is a walkable city, and I'm a huge fan of walkable cities. Yeah, because to get to know a city, I have to walk the city and to feel it and to think that I'm part of the body of the city. Yeah? And cities, and I think Lahore is one of these cities. Though cities in general, they are utopian and they are dystopian at the same time. And you have cities now here in Asia, the sheer size is like, is threatening. 18 million people in Istanbul, I don't know, 18 or 20 million people here in Lahore. And the city which has grown here, it's not so nice like the old city. It's not everywhere the walkable bazaar city. And so that's the thing, the megapolis, and we have to say most of the people living today are living in megapolis, and this is threatening.
Thank you. So listening to David and Mohsin, the thing is, you were talking about invisible cities, of course, but can you, the writers, build a city about with absence, with like you were saying that Mohsin was saying that there's a lot of young people living. Lahore, can you build your own city about what doesn't exist anymore here, or that in Portugal we have a word for it, saudade, what you missed, like David is saying, what you missed is important for you when you write?
I don't think we can survive without inventing a lot of stuff, because as David, really correctly pointed out, I mean, a lot of the cities which we are still trying to romanticize, partially for self-preservation, partially to retain our sanity, and partially to ensure that the remaining years we have are not intolerable, are cities in our mind. So when I write about Lahore, I'm writing about multiple Lahores, not only spatially, but also temporally. I'm writing about a Lahore which I miss, a Lahore which was more walkable, a Lahore which was greener, a Lahore which was not so overpopulated. So some of these cities do show manifestations of being dystopias now. In my current novel as well, I'm in pollution and the traffic, and that does not just have an impact on your physical well-being, it's also your psychological well-being, the noise, the lack of sort of space to have privacy. So those are very real challenges, and I feel that much as writing fiction is different from writing a political manifesto or a policy or a pamphlet, in many ways these are acts of defiance and resistance and critique, trying to say that, look, this is what you had and this is what you've made it. So these are all acts of defiance, but these are also escapades, so to speak. So Mohsin pointed out one particular facet of houses with courtyards, which is a beautiful sort of facet of Islamic architecture and Lahore architecture. Another dimension is if you go to the rooftops of the old city, and we used to have Basant, which was this very colorful kite flying festivals. Now, if you were standing on top of a 4-story building in the medieval part of Lahore, the vistas which open up to you are quite unique. It's an incredibly liberating experience. So, but Basant is no more. It just exists in my mind now. And I write about it, and through that writing, I'm trying to give the younger generation of a sense of the egalitarianism, the sense of color, the sense of liberation, which you had through this festival, which was a very peculiarly Lahore-based festival. You had it in some other towns, but not at this scale. So absence, in that sense, is a very big part of what I write about the city. A lot of it is about gaps and about things which made the city special and which you yearn for. Some of them are irreversibly lost, and others you're still striving to somehow latch onto and to hold on to, and have again a Lahore which is in the 21st century, but it has the charm of all those earlier centuries which made it so special.
Thank you. So I have a final question for everybody. I'm sorry, because the conversation is so good, but I think we should give some time for our audience to make one question or two. But I have a final question to all of you, and then I tell a story afterwards. But Sofka, it's the same one for everybody, okay? Sofka, there are, of course, do you think history is important and everything we've been written is a document? Do you think fiction and books, can you tell us if you feel that your books are going to be documents for the future? Are you making, all of you, are you making history for the future?
I think you can only speak about other people's books and the sort of impact that they have on you. It would be a foolish writer who would say whether their own books will go into history or not. But I do very strongly believe in fiction and personal variants on non-fiction, so perhaps like travel writing or memoir, or where the heart and soul of the writer goes into the work. I think that that can get you into the feeling of a place in a way that nothing else can. And so you can go straight into the emotions. My daughter sent me a message 2 days ago. She's traveling in Italy, in India, she lives in Athens, and she said she's reading Mohsin's The Reluctant Fundamentalist. And she said, "Mom, he even talks about the Punjab club where you're staying." And she was so thrilled. That's gone straight into my daughter's mind. And so for me, this is the most precious thing I can say about it. It's already history.
Thank you. So, Mohsin, do you think it's I think fiction and books are a document for history. Do you think so?
Well, I think one thing I can say as a Lahori is that I've always felt that this is a city of writers. It made sense to me, you know, that one could be a writer because of how this city regards its writers.
So
you know,
you are obligated to be a writer.
There are, you know, Osama was talking about Data Saab, you know, who was actually not from Lahore. He came to Lahore, Al-Hajweri, and didn't necessarily love the place when he got here, but he came here, and we still remember him, and we remember the poets, and we remember all these other writers. You know, if you go to New York or London and you say, you know, I'm a writer, people might say, oh, you know, anything I would have read, or have they made a movie, or do you make any money at it, or, you know. In Lahore, people always say, you know, that's a wonderful thing to do. I mean, you know, how wonderful. That you feel like a fraud, you know, because people think you're contributing to humanity, but there's a feeling about it in this city. And I think that, you know, we're all, when we write, whether we're writing novels or just, you know, writing a letter to a friend, we're setting words into time, and they will then exist. When Osama was speaking about rooftops and Basant, he wasn't writing it at this moment, but those words were then introduced into this room. And I found myself thinking about those rooftops. You know, I found my finger, the little crease in my finger where the door, the string covered in glass would catch and cut me so badly when I was a kid. And I remember those rooftops where, for the first time in Lahore, which is nonetheless quite a classist, segregated in many ways city, on the rooftop, it was the commons. It was wide open. You could be flying your kite against, a kid of any background, unknown to you. And so, in the sort of gladiatorial combat of the Basant skies, Lahoris encountered each other in a way that was really, really quite something. And for those of us who have those scars on our fingers, I was never very good at it, but I cut my fingers much more than I cut anybody else's kites. But just the words that he said took me there. And so to answer your question of, are we contributing to history, I think all of us in our lives, when we put down words that will remain and be read, perhaps or not, by somebody else, are contributing in this way. Because we are allowing people to connect to other times and other moments. And in a city like Lahore, you see all around you how that works. You see people in their thousands going to offer a prayer or listen to a song in a place where somebody who once wrote is now dead, was buried. So that's one thing which I think Lahore can sort of teach all of us, which is that everyone, in a way, is a writer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. David. So, do you think your writing just put every word a register for the future also? Are you an historian?
I don't know, but to be honest, it works for myself, at least. So, because I think I always wanted to give a description of the contemporary and about the things around me. And so, because I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, the things have become historic documents. And I myself, I have totally forgotten what I've written 25 years ago. Yeah, that's so natural. So when I look into this book with the first texts from 1997 and 1998, I wonder who has written that and who was this person? And so I can read it like a stranger. And so for myself it works, and hopefully it works for other people, other readers as well. And hopefully there will be readers, but I have to admit Lahore and this book fair, or this festival, gives me hope, because, and I like very much what you said about the standing of the writer here in Pakistan, in Lahore, in this ancient center of culture, that, yeah, you have this kind of status. I wish we had more of this in Europe.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. So, Siddique, what do you think? Do you think you're writing history also? Or you read history?
I have no illusions of grandeur whatsoever. But yes, this much is true, that whenever you write seriously, or at least with a serious intent, and I write historical fiction, consciously and subconsciously you're trying to document something, and not just document something factually, but you're also documenting perceptions and emotions and lived experience. Throughout my life, the most moving moments have been when I've read a great piece of writing. Those are the moments which have then driven me to do whatever I went on to do, and those are the moments which stay with me and appear to me to be the most profound experiences I've had. So if I'm sort of emulating that tradition, and I agree with Mohsin that despite all the challenges that we face in terms of how much we spend on education and all that, and the state of our publishing industry, this is a culture which values its writers, its poets. Even the Sufi saints, actually, some of them were poets, and they were writing. So all that is part of my subconscious. But to take an example from your context, which we were talking about, my biggest reference points and the lenses I have of looking at Lisbon are Fernando Pessoa and José Saramago. they are the people who introduced me to the multiple dimensions of the city and the larger culture. And when I went there 2 summers ago, I was actually looking for streets and corners and neighborhoods which appear in their stories, because the stories resonated so deeply with me. Whether it's the description of Muslim Lisbon in the history of the siege of Lisbon by Saramago, or whether it is the Book of Disquiet by Pessoa, in which he describes the winding and sort of going up and down streets of Lisbon. So this is how people from a very different culture have made an indelible sort of impact on my mind about the perception of an entire culture and civilization, and a very multifarious, rich, and positive one, right? So we do our bit because we feel that there are things which need to be preserved. Whether they are preserved, nobody can tell. Life and history are very harsh masters, right? Who's remembered, who's not. And in some ways, that should not be our preoccupation. We do what we do in our brief moment in life, and then life moves on.
Thank you so much. So, is there anyone who wants to make a question? Sorry, I cannot see everything, but you will have a microphone. I am asking to be quick, okay, so we can get some other people to the questions.
Hi, thank you. So a quick comment and a quick question. One about the local connection with poetry and literature. There's an expression that people use here. I'll say it in Punjabi. They say, "Dode maiye kadda hai." It's in there, and he brings out these kind of poetic verses. That's the local way of saying that this person writes poetry. He doesn't write, but he brings it out. That's embedded in the language. So that's the comment. And then the question, the way I've built the impression that all of you have had experience of displacement of the mind and of the space of the cities shifting. And it seems to be a common ground in a lot of writers, a lot of creative people. Does it have an impact on your view of the city that you wrote about, or where you placed your stories? Displacement, mental and physical, both.
Who wants to answer? Sofka.
Okay, I don't know if I'm the best person, but I've certainly lived a displaced life. I was talking about it earlier with Mohsin, and I think for me, I have seen a benefit in being displaced in different places and being an outsider, because although it can personally make you feel uncomfortable, and knowing that you don't fit easily into the space, it also gives you the outsider's eye. And as a student, I studied social anthropology, which of course means that you go as an outsider and you have to try and make sense of some people often very far away and very different to how you are. And although there are many maybe negative things to be said about how can somebody from far away understand, I think also the freshness of your eye when you are displaced, and also what we were all saying earlier, which is that quite often it's easier to write about somewhere you knew when you're not there. So for me, when I wrote my previous book, Putney, set in the place where I grew up in London, I wasn't there, I was in Greece, and I only briefly went back to try and remember the physical places, but mostly it was going on in my mind. So I think that these shifts that you were mentioning, I would totally say that they're very useful for inspiration and for literature.
Thank you, Sofka. Is there anyone with one more question?
Yeah, my question is that everybody in Lahore is a poet. Poet in the sense that you can go on the street, the man on the street, the taxi driver, the rickshaw driver, people in their homes, they can all quote a few verses. and they're like really, there's this poetic emergence in them. And my question was, is it to do with Lahore? Is it to do with the culture? Is it to do with our traumas? That there's so much poetry here floating around.
See, I don't know who wants to answer.
We can both
We'll
give it
just-
a
so
shot.
let me just say 2 more questions. That lady over there and that Mr. over there, okay? And we are going to finish, okay? Thank you so much.
So I'm going to say this in the lighter vein, and so please take it in that to me now it seems that most people in Lahore are property dealers. The fact that you've come across, but there is hope. You're right that the number of people who can recite a couplet, mostly wrongly, or misattributing it, are quite a few. But I think the reason why this poetic bent exists is because we come from an oral tradition. And historically speaking, all our greatest tales, Dastane Amir Hamza, Tilisme Hoshruba, are in the oral tradition. People memorize things, and they're very lyrical. Also because in Urdu at least, and I think to a great extent in Punjabi, the novel and the short story came much later. The biggest sort of forms of expression were poetry, and hence the various forms, ghazal, qawwali, this and that. So it's a tradition deeply steeped in song and poetry. Even our religious figures, mystical figures. Shah Hussain is a great poet. Bulle Shah is a great poet, right? So it permeates so many walks of life, and I think that's the reason. And then I think Lahoris, whatever their other foibles and problems may be, are romantics. And so romance and poetry go together. So.
Thank you. So,
hello, everyone. That was a wonderful talk. And my question is for Mohsin Hamid, that given the fact that you are considered here in South Asian literary voices as one of the diasporic voices, I want to know that what is the idea of home to you and your characters?
We were just talking about this earlier. So I've lived probably a little bit more than half my life in Lahore. I'm 53 and I've spent, I think, 27-ish of those years at Lahore. And in Lahore, I live in the same house that I grew up in, so I've never really moved. Although I might, move soon within Lahore. But so in one sense, it's sort of weird to be diasporic because, I've lived here. But on the other hand, I am a very diasporic writer. But maybe not in the sense of being a writer who lives in London or New York and writes about Lahore, although I've done those things. But also in the sense of being a writer who's lived half his life abroad and is now, in Lahore. That's also a kind of diasporic existence. When I went to California when I was 3 years old, I didn't speak a word of English. I spoke Urdu and Punjabi. When I came back when I was 9, I spoke English. I didn't know a word of Urdu and Punjabi. I lost my first 2 languages. Then I recovered my Urdu and I wouldn't say I recovered my Punjabi, but I recovered some acquaintanceship with my Punjabi. And I lost something, at the age of 3. I lost a couple of languages. I got another language and then in my life I've moved between the 2 places. And I think this kind of sense of being a foreigner everywhere was something that when I was small, I learned how to hide. How do you sound like a Lahori teenager and have the right slang, and basically people can't tell you lived abroad, and then when you go to America or you go to London or you go to wherever, you kind of find a way to fit in. This chameleon-like skill that you get when you're a diasporic person. But as the years went by, what I realized was that, maybe in a sense, everybody has this kind of experience. That we all belong to the diaspora from our childhood. That even if you've never left Lahore, the Lahore that existed in 1971 when I was born doesn't exist anymore. And even if you grew up in 80s Lahore or 90s Lahore or 90s Berlin, those places don't exist anymore. And so I think the way I think of it now is that I am a diasporic person. I am kind of a foreigner everywhere I go, even where I live. But it bothers me less because I've come to think that everybody else is too. they're also a little bit diasporic. They're also a little bit foreigners. You know, as we get older in particular, we realize that we are speaking about a city that young people think very differently about. So I guess my answer to you is that I think of myself as a diasporic writer who is dealing with the subject of the diaspora inside everyone when I think about what fiction is.
Thank you. So, David, you want to add anything? No? Okay, last question.
May I just ask a question? Oh, good evening. I'm a student from Lahore Grammar School Defense, and I hopefully have one quick question. So if cities were to be characters actually in one shared plot, which I would like to think is the current international affairs, which specific archetypes would you designate as specific cities? And by archetypes, I mean the ones that are very ubiquitous in classic literature, for example, the fallen angel or the tragic hero. And which ones would be the cities that would be stagnant as characters, and which ones would be the ones that would propel the plot forward?
Oh, great question. David, can you enlighten us?
Acoustically, I didn't really understand. What was the question? It was so quick.
So,
Could you
what
rephrase
I understand,
it?
Can you say it more, in a much more quick time? And
Oh, you understood it. You could rephrase it.
What I understood is what type of model do you have to speak about a city? Is that it? Archetypes, yeah.
What archetype, which city would be which archetype, I think is the...
Should I repeat my question?
Yes.
So, yeah, that is exactly my question. Which archetypes would you give to like specific cities?
Well, so one thing that comes to my mind is Paris, the capital of the 19th century, and then you have the archetype of the flaneur, yeah? You have Baudelaire and his friends who, like, for the first time live in a modern city, yeah? That's the first modern city, and they realize that there's the terreur du temps all of a sudden, that there is the terror of time, and to protest to this, they start to slowly walk the boulevards, yeah? So this is like the invention of walking just for fun, yeah? And so you have the archetype of the dandy flaneur who walks his tortoise, yeah? And who walks with his turtle just to show that he is not obliged to work. And so this would be my archetype for Paris. Actually, I have no other archetypes for other cities. I would have to live maybe 5 years, as I heard, in
so
Lahore.
I think she will be a good writer
She
and build
will. Yeah.
that idea very strongly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sir, yes. Last question, or do we have space for more?
Actually, welcome to Lahore. You have spent only 2 days in Lahore, and Lahore has 5,000 years cultural history. A person who has spent 2 days, how he can describe about Lahore? So other thing is this, you do not know that tomorrow is a horse derby in Lahore. From the day past week there was a festival. From 14 days ago there was a Think Fest festivals. So there is a tomb of Mia Mir. There is a Shah Jamal. You don't know about the Dhamal of Shah Jamal. You don't know about the Bibi Pak Daman, how sacred place this is.
So what's the question, please?
This is also a question.
Okay, so
These
can
are the
you...
question. I'm describing the grandeur of my city.
I know.
Ma'am was on the view that fragrance is
Thank you so
everywhere.
much.
Fragrance is everywhere in Paris. So I wish to tell you that that economic uplifting is based on fragrance. My poor people, wealth is in Sarai Mahal, is in other countries. So we
Can I just try and respond to that? First of all, the theme here was not whether we're extolling or praising a particular city. The idea was, how do writers think in the abstract in their writing about cities, how cities influence them. And if you had been paying close attention, the two Lahoris here seem to be super excited about Lahore. And we've lived here most of our lives. And we love the city, which is why we write about them. And our valued guests are talking about other wonderful cities of the world, because one thing when you learn when you live in a great city is that there can be many. And so we are celebrating all of them. We're looking at their complexity. And what you mentioned about the multifariousness of Lahore, that is something which, despite their very short experience here, our guests have been incredibly generous to already appreciate, for which we are very thankful.
Thank you. So, thank you so much for being here. I have a confession to make. So I believe that when you build your own personal library, you are telling the story of your life. I have different libraries or different ideas of a library. So I always pick up my own books and I put them like alphabetic order, sometimes in countries order, sometimes in feelings order, poetry, fiction, nonfiction. But now I do have an idea. And I love Rome, for instance, in Italy. I have a lot of books about Rome. Why not build a library about cities? And I know that the next city will be Lahore. Thank you so much.